Hi, everyone. Welcome to a very special PredRev Live workshop. This is a bit of a different thing than what we normally do on our PredRev Lives, and we're so excited to have you join us for this. You might have seen over just the past week or so, we've been putting out some sales development methodology content. We've got that nice little short explainer video that Colin's got on YouTube, and we've got the new methodology published on the website. So today, we're going to chat through that stuff in greater detail. And we've got a wonderful little panel here to join us. We've got some familiar faces from Predictable Revenue, and then we've got a wonderful external expert who's going to give some of her perspective as well. So in just a moment, I'll have everyone introduce themselves, but we'll give everyone a couple of seconds to trickle in here. As you join us, if you're joining us on YouTube, which actually that's the only place you could be joining us. So as you join us on YouTube, why don't you just shoot us a note about what role you're in your company? It's always great to see what perspectives are joining us, and then it allows us to give kind of appropriate context that really meets our audience. So please let us know. Colin is having a look in the chat. Throughout the rest of today, we're going to be going for an hour. If you have any questions at all about the sales development methodology, best practices, any of that stuff, also feel free to put that stuff in the chat. We'll either answer it live or send you a great resource to help answer that question. So do not hesitate to pop something in there. So let me give you a little bit of an overview of what we're doing today. So as I mentioned, this is a workshop, and what we're going to be doing is diving into the new sales development methodology. So the new sales development methodology is broken into two parts, the first part being the principles, and that is the part that we're going to focus on today. So this new methodology is one that we have built and used and battle tested. And now we're going to open source it and share everything with you as part of this new sales development methodology initiative. So this information comes from our clients. It comes from our podcast guests. It comes from testing actually boots on the ground when we're doing our own prospecting and prospecting for our clients. And so now we're going to dive into the first half of that. So let's start off with a round of introductions. I will go to our lovely unfamiliar guest first. Alice, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Alice Hyman, and my company is Alice Hyman LLC. I'm a sales strategist, and I work with the CEOs of companies who have a business-to-business complex sale to help them increase their revenues and increase the value of their company, so all the investors are very happy. And so I get to spend my day with wonderful people like Colin, helping them strategize and think of more and better ways to help their customers and engage with their customers. And of course, that's part of what SDRs do. So I'm very excited about this conversation, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us, Alice. It's wonderful to have you here. And I'll go to Carrie next.
Great, thank you. Hello, my name is Carrie White. I am Predictable Revenue's Senior VP of Coaching and Delivery, and I come from a long line of sales leadership and management across companies like IBM, a number of startups, and a long hosting venture in sales training globally across a number of different roles, SDRs obviously being one of them, but also account executives, et cetera. So bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise in a variety of areas. And I'm equally excited to be here and talk a little bit more about positioning and pace and many more things.
Nice, amazing. And Colin.
Hey, my name is Colin Stewart. I'm an SDR here at Predictable Revenue.
And a darn good one.
Yeah. I booked so many meetings that I got to close them, and then I closed so many deals that I got to manage the team, and then so I've sort of worked my way up. So I've been a little bit of everything. I spent 10 years as an account exec before starting Predictable Revenue or joining Predictable Revenue or merging with. It's a long story of how we kind of got to there, probably a different podcast. I know we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but yeah. I'm excited for the methodology. I think, one reason, like I'm honored to be on this panel. I know, we kind of asked everybody, but like Carrie is maybe not giving herself enough credit in that she spent a bunch of time running all of the sales, I shouldn't say all of the sales training, but quite a bit of sales training for IBM. And if you've ever heard of the new strategic selling, I know Alice, you probably don't want to, rely on the last name too much, but if you don't recognize the last name, you haven't read the best sales book out there. And the thing that got me excited about having Alice on the panel is the fact that I know you were very involved in building the Train the Trainer program. So not only does she consult on her own, but she's had quite a hand in building and scaling sort of sales systems and methodologies. So that's why it's especially, she's going to be especially challenging here because she's been there and done this before. We brought a ringer and they told her to come after me. So,
Oh yeah.
Watch out.
Amazing. Well, Colin, to give us a bit of context, tell us why we've published a new sales development methodology.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, we all recognize that predictable revenue isn't the newest book. Aaron initially wrote it coming out of Salesforce, back when Salesforce wasn't the, gazillion dollar startup it is today. And there were some old parts, and I know we refreshed the book in 2019, but there was never really a proper, here is the methodology. These are the things that you need to look at. And we had there's been a lot of struggles with sort of internally and externally about, how do you build an SDR team? What is the right number of people? What are the right things? And I've seen so many people invest a lot of money in sales development and not get any returns from it. I know, Alice, you posted something fairly recently, to the effect. And I think it was frustrating watching, people get so very close. You're 90% of the way there. You've done all the hard work, but you're missing like 2 or 3 pieces, and just watching it like all your results multiplied by 0. And so that to me was kind of the realization that, whether we call it a methodology or not, there are some key pieces of information that we need to get out there so that people can get more, get more value out of predictable revenue, the book, out of their sales development team, and stop making some of the mistakes that we learned, and we've learned from our clients, we've learned from ourselves. And so that was really the reason we wanted to just get the information out there. And we're probably going to be putting it in another book at some point, and there's probably going to be more training and coaching and stuff like that. But we want to make sure that we're getting it all out there so that there's not, we're not like, okay, well, here's the 11 steps to like perfect revenue, and you can only get the full details if you give us $99, 3 easy payments and $99. Like to me, that's nonsense. We're trying to get it all up on the site. So no matter where you're at revenue wise, you can access this information, and you can come to stuff like this and hit us up on YouTube if you want to learn more.
And if I could just add, I just really feel like this is so important because companies are doing this activity and not getting the results they need. So this methodology is about getting better results and less burnout, because we know that we're burning out SDRs at a very fast pace, and this is not good for anyone. So better results, less burnout. I love it. Let's hit that methodology.
Do it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Let's do it. So we've got 3 elements of this first half, the part 1 of the new methodology. So overall, they encompass the principles that we say are kind of the foundational elements that need to be addressed first and perfected first, because as Colin said, if anything is kind of missing here, you multiply your results by 0. So it doesn't matter how great the SDRs are that you have on the team, doesn't matter how well crafted that email is, if you haven't nailed these initial elements. So the first of these initial elements is positioning. Colin, can you tell us what you mean by that?
No.
Great. Okay, we'll just end it here.
Podcast over. Yeah, live stream over. Just say hey to Mark, Laura, and Shruti that are joining us in chat. Hi, we see you there. If you got comments or whatever, I'm watching the chat, so feel free to pop in with questions. In terms of positioning, and maybe just some an additional context and why we kind of separated there's the sort of playbook, and then there's these 3 things, and it was kind of the tactical of how you build an SDR team. And that's kind of that'll be our second workshop. This is some of the strategic high level core pieces that need to be in place that are kind of the do not pass go, do not collect $200. And a lot of these, if you hear me rambling on or getting a little bit about it, it's because these aren't things that we're just making up, that we didn't just sit there and be like, what's wrong with sales development? We struggled and fought our way through a lot of these, and positioning is one of those first ones where I think if I look at, what I mean by positioning is your position in the market. Another way to look at it would be product market fit. Do you have something that people want to buy? And when I look at, I see a lot of people that are new to predictable revenue, a lot of teams generally, there's a lot of new companies that are going from first customer acquisition channel to second customer acquisition channel. And the first one is founder network or customer development interviews or inbound because you wrote some blog posts and things like that. And the second one is, and they want to use outbound as the second one. And they think because we've sold some business, we've closed some customers, we have product market fit. And it's like, okay, maybe. And oftentimes, I mean, you could, if you want to get real philosophical, you could go to the person who coined the term initially, which was Mark Andreessen. And in his comment, I can't remember exactly what the quote is. It's probably linked in our methodology somewhere, but it's effectively customers are coming at you hand over fist, and they're coming at you faster than you can serve them. And that's his definition of sort of, we'll call it hyper growth product market fit. That's for venture backed firms that are creating something new. And I think that is one piece. And then I think the rest of product market fit kind of exists on a bit of a grade or a scale from like, you don't have it to you have it to you have strong product market fit. And then there's this like bizarro world. You've raised $300 million hyper growth product market fit. And so that's kind of that's the reason why positioning was the first thing that we thought of, because we've come into contact with and been involved in a number of companies where you start doing outbound and you're building the team and you're not getting results. And when you look back and you start looking at those calls, or you start digging into like, okay, well, why did you want to go after this target segment? It's like, oh, well, we thought that we wanted to do X. We thought that we needed to do Y. It's like, okay, well, do you have any clients in this particular market segment? And Alice is smiling. I feel like we've had this same conversation with, a number of clients, likely different clients. And it turns out that, you've got a couple of early wins, just 3 to 5 customers, but there's nothing real sustainable, repeatable, scalable that's there. And I think that's the biggest piece, that if you don't quite have it locked in exactly what you are trying to sell and who you're trying to sell to, you can't say you have product market fit. You can't say you're well positioned. If you've got a ton of competitors that can say exactly the same thing as you, and you don't know how to differentiate and how to speak that language, your sales development team is never going to be successful or as successful as they could be. And it's not just a matter of having product market fit or having a strong position. It's communicating that to the rest of your team so that they know. Because if they don't know, it's like if a tree has product market fit in the woods, but nobody hears it, this is the worst analogy ever. Alice, I imagine you got something smarter to say about this.
You're aiming at the wrong people with the wrong message. That's what it comes down to, right?
Yeah.
So when you do that, and then you put people on the phone or on the email or on the LinkedIn it's like, I'm talking to a person who is a swimmer about climbing a mountain. And they're like, why are you talking to me about that? So it's just so odd and absurd that of course you cannot get any traction, right? And the whole point here is, if you have good product market fit and you have the right message to the right people, then people are intrigued and they want to have a conversation. And that's as simple as it is. The positioning allows you to have those conversations. When you have poor product market fit, you don't get conversations, and people get burnt out from smiling and dialing or sending emails or, spamming people on LinkedIn because nobody wants to talk to them. Why? Because they're aiming at the wrong people with the wrong message. So if you stop for a minute what you're doing with all of your SDRs and just ask yourself that question, do we have the right message for the right people? You're probably going to see some missteps there, some mismessaging, some aiming just slightly off or maybe really off. And if you pull that all back around and get the right message to the right people, you get conversations, which is all we're really trying to do, right? That's how we generate leads.
And Alice, I want to jump in on that, because this is, to me, the positioning is like the foundation of a home. Like this is, do not pass go at all.
Right.
You have to have this nailed. And so to your point in the burnout piece is, how boring is it if you're not actually analytically thinking about your audience and your buyers and your product or your service and how it's differentiated in the marketplace, and what does that do compared to your competitors, and how are you uniquely positioned and advantageous, and how do you then script messages or be able to tease, if you will, potential prospects into actually wanting to learn more. I mean, if you're not doing those basic steps, then you're missing the total foundation of everything that it takes in order to actually properly position and build a uniquely prosperous sales development opportunity out of everything that you do. So I can't say enough about this step. It is a huge phase, and there are a lot of companies that don't spend enough time really analyzing and understanding it, and to Colin's point, articulating it and being able to share that obviously with their audience.
I have a little tangent, if you'll permit me. I just want to walk along this little jetty, because
don't go too far.
I won't. Feel free to be like, hey, Colin, you're too far out there. Get back in. But I do get this question a lot. That I talk to early founders, and they're like, okay, well, I'm founder-led selling right now. What do I do next? And can I use sales development? And kind of is the answer. You can use the tactics of sales development as an entrepreneur, as a founder, to book meetings. But if you're seeking product market fit, if you're trying to book meetings with people to do customer development interviews, you're using roughly the same tools, roughly the same strategies, but for a different purpose. And so the messaging looks different. The flow looks different. The reason that the calls that you're setting up are different. And so, yes, you can use this to book meetings if you're a new founder. And like when I was starting my first company, Voltage CRM, which was awful, just total garbage. I think I used sales development tactics to reach out to 100 or so, I think 50 VPs of sales, and I think 50 sales consultants. Alice didn't respond back to me. I don't.
You didn't intrigue me.
It wasn't a good product, so I don't blame you. But as a founder, I use these things, and my messaging, the motion was geared towards, can I interview you? Can I ask you some questions? I'm here to learn, not to sell. Right. It was very much like, hey, I'm working on this. Is that relevant to you? Do you want to chat about it? As opposed to, hey, I'm trying to sell you this thing. Right. And so I just wanted to walk out on that peninsula and say, okay, if you're a founder and you're thinking, okay, well, so I can't use sales development. That's correct. You can't, and you can. You can use the tactics, but it's a very different thing. And when I say you can't, I mean, you're not going to get a return on your investment in terms of like, you're not going to hit the call booking numbers that you need. You're not going to hit the pipeline goals, and you're not going to be like, chances are it's not going to be, ROI positive in the first couple of quarters, because the goal with call it founder-led sales development approach, where the goal is to learn, the ROI is feedback and strategy, right? So there's not dollars and cents that are going to hit your profit and loss statement. It's learning. And I would argue it's, if you don't have product market fit and you're in search of it, it is the single most important thing that you need. And you will absolutely get a return on it, but it's impossible to quantify within any sort of reasonable reporting period. And so, yes, you can. No, you can't. I've got a blog post that says something like that, something to that effect, that we'll put up on the site a little bit later. Carrie, Alice, any comments, any thoughts on that before?
Yeah, I just want to say this to everybody out there that's listening. Sales should be easy. If it's hard, you're doing it wrong. And so when you don't have product market fit, it's hard. And that's one of the ways you can tell. If you keep running into the wall, it's hard. It's too hard. It's because you don't have product market fit, because people who need what you have need to find you. They need you to find them. And so we have to really think about, why is it hard? Go back to product market fit. Are we selling the right thing to the right people? If the answer is yes, then you go to the next thing, which is, then what's the problem? Why isn't our message intriguing them? Oh, because we don't understand a day in their life. So our SDRs, or ourselves, whoever's making the calls or making the outreach, the emails, the LinkedIn's, we don't understand them. So we can't intrigue them. So you might have product market fit, but be sure first, because if you start changing your messaging and changing the way people are doing things before you do product market fit, your position, if you do those other things first, you're still going to hit a brick wall and you're going to think something else is wrong when what you should have done is gone all the way back to the beginning and get that product market fit right.
I echo and underline and exclamation that. And the biggest piece of positioning, as I said, was the foundation, and part of it's the mindset. And it's not your mindset. I think there's so many people that are in their own minds or in their own heads. Get out of your own head and put yourself in the position of your customer's head, your prospect's head, that target audience, that target market. What do they care about? What is and how is your unique value of what you offer and sell going to encompass and provide the value and the proof to those buyers or potential buyers? What are the features and capabilities that are unique to you? And how can you make their lives easier? How does it help them achieve their goals? How does it help them with their business? It's all about them. And so position your mindset the same way as you would define in your own positioning, as well as your target addressable market, your service market, et cetera.
Yeah.
I'll add one more thing.
Oh,
sorry. You go ahead, Sarah, because I was actually going to throw it back to you after I said my thing, because I know you've had the interesting experience of prospecting on behalf of predictable revenue. And I know you, at one point, you had this idiot boss who was like, hey, go after these markets that we've never had success in. And we had one successful client in. So I'm curious what your experience was there. And I know you've also been an SDR manager here on behalf of clients that were maybe had maybe more intelligence behind the strategy of why you're reaching out. So maybe you can sort of compare and contrast. The thing I was going to interject was I had a chat with our friend Kenny the other day, and we've actually been helping his team with like a product, basically book customer development interviews. And the thing that the comment that he shared with me is that when they finally got their positioning right, it went from like pushing a big rock up a hill to they'd send an email to somebody and they go, oh, you can do that. And like, that's what we're looking for. And I felt that when we built Carb. That was a different story. It caught on fire. It didn't go well. When we first built Accelerate and started helping people with implementing predictable revenue and sales development, like I talked to one person and be like, let me refer you to two other people. That's what really strong product market fit felt like to me. Right. Sarah, I know this was my long sort of tangent to get back to you. What did it feel like compared to like when you were first going to reaching out to some of those shitty campaigns? Oh, we won't say who it was, but who sent you after these crappy markets that we didn't have much success in?
Sounds like this. No.
Yeah. Well, I would say it ties into what all three of you have been saying about positioning. And I think the one piece that we forget when we're talking about positioning is we think about it in terms of the companies that we're reaching out to, but not the human being that is the buyer at the company. And that's kind of one missing piece that I learned as I went on. So initially, of course, I know the pains that we solve as predictable revenue. I know the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for customers, but that was the issue. It was like for customers, but who is that? That's not a person that buys from you. I'm not talking to customer when I send out an email. So there's an additional layer that belongs within this umbrella of positioning that is like, okay, you've got your outbound ideal customer profile that is not the same as your inbound ideal customer profile, because you can take customers through inbound at a lower average deal size because the customer acquisition cost is less. You can service them and that's fine. Your outbound ideal customer profile has to be big. The juice has to be worth the squeeze for outbound. So you've got already this like slightly different ideal customer profile for, I guess you emphasize the ideal for outbound. We've got the ICP, but then under the ICP lives the buyer personas, and the buyer personas are who you're reaching out to, not the ICP. So I think often we get hung up on in the messaging and the positioning. It's like, I help companies grow their revenue. Let me tell companies how I help them grow their revenue. And it's like, well, actually every product in the world helps you grow your revenue. Like it's not a differentiator.
Literally, well, and companies don't buy anything, right, Sarah?
Yeah.
People do. So that's what's hard. We get the messaging mixed up, right?
Right. But what I learned in doing this and doing it the wrong way and reaching out to yeah, these different personas kind of about the same general business impact, is that there's an individual impact and then there's the business impact. And the business impact is like save money, increase profit, save time, reduce churn, like whatever, these generalities. But what is impactful to that person, what piques their interest and intrigues them, like you're saying, Alice, is the impact on them in their day to day. And that's what's missing, I think, in so many companies, knowledge about their ICP. They know they want to go after like a high growth, digitally innovative company with $2 million and 4,000 employees, but 2 million and 4,000. That'd be a bit of a tough one. We'll say 20 million and 4,000. That'd be crazy. But then they're missing like, okay, and then within there, who makes up the buying committee and what do each of them care about, and talk to them about that. And so that was the piece that I think also, yeah, it's just this missing layer that fits into positioning. It's not just the company, it's not just the ICP, it's the impact on the human that's going to sign the dotted line and make that decision. And sometimes you got to talk to more than just the human that signs the dotted line, which is a whole other thing that we'll dive into a little bit more in the tactics. But yeah, that was the difference that I saw. Like once I realized I was speaking to the human about the pains in their day versus speaking to the company about the overall impact that I could have, that was a huge difference for me. And that's when it, got easier.
I think just to help everybody who's listening to think about it really simply, the ideal customer profile is a profile of a company that is likely to need what you have. So maybe they have X amount of people, X amount of revenue, they use certain other software. So it's describing the type of company who's most likely to need what you have. But what we then do is need to know who the people are at that company that will be intrigued by our message. And we have to know what will intrigue them based on what they do, what a day in their life is like. So we have to have both of those. We can't have one without the other. First, we have to aim right at the verticals and the, different types of companies that are most likely to need what we have. And then we have to know the people inside of those companies that will be the ones making the decision. And in a complex sale, we know there are so many people involved and each of them might be intrigued by something different. So this is where it becomes a little bit more complex. Yet, if we take those complexities in and understand from the buyer's point of view, then sales becomes much easier. So that's great, Sarah, that you, when you figured out, oh gosh, yeah, don't talk to the company, talk to the people. And each of those people might need something just a little bit different in order to make it worth the pain of the change.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if we got to switch topics, I know, but the last piece on this is a lot of companies and a lot of people will sit there and go, okay, well, that's nice and all, but how do I do that? How do I know what each of the different buyers and the buyer personas that gets thrown around so much, that language, how do I really know? And I don't have time when I'm calling all the time to be able to research or ask them that. But it's pretty straightforward when you've got thousands and if not hundreds of different job role descriptions out there. So go do some of that research and do it in aggregate, right? If you know that there's certain buyers, if it's a CRO, if it's a HR, whatever it is that your key target buyers are, if you will, potential buyers are, do that research in aggregate, find the fundamental things of what they generally care about. And then as you're having those conversations, then hone into then the specifics that actually do matter to them in their role at that particular company. So that way it's not as daunting.
And this is where I believe your own team can be very helpful. And most companies do not do this. So you're trying to get your SDRs positioned really well to do their job, make it easy, get the appointment scheduled that you want them to get scheduled, right? So back to this, who is the product market fit if you don't have that right? So you have people in your own company who have the titles that you want your SDRs to call. You have a person who's in charge of HR, whatever their title may be. You have a person in charge of finance, whatever their title may be, because there's all different titles, but you still have a person who heads up that function. Ask them to tell you what their function cares about. They're all in groups, like HR people, they're in a group called, Society for Human Resources. They know lots of other people who run HR and they know what those people care about. So use your own team to help you understand those you will be calling on and what they do care about. That's the fastest, simplest, easiest thing you can do. Secondly, you can just quickly go to the customers that do buy from you, the ones that have those titles, and ask if they would, be on a little panel or something and talk to your team and say, this is the kind of things we care about. So asking them can help you to, once you've got that product market fit right, then move, to those personas and what's going to intrigue them. Just use what's easy already around you.
Mhm. Last piece I'll say on this, and I love what Carrie brought up in the mindset of, oh, I'm a rev leader. I don't have time to do this.
Yes.
And it's the old saying, and I'll attribute it to the wrong person, so I'm not even going to guess. I'll say it was Alice Hyman that said this. That if I had 8 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 7 hours sharpening the saw.
Wasn't that Abraham Lincoln? I think, yeah.
I think,
I don't
but
know.
I was like, is it another famous ex-president? Like I couldn't remember.
Could be.
Yeah. So sharpen the saw. It's, what is it? Franklin Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think it was like chapter 6, something like that. Because that was the only chapter I read for school because I had to do a report on that chapter. But it's absolutely this. There's this, as a revenue leader, you feel this pressure to book meetings or to hit your number. And so you feel like I can't stop and slow down and do these things first. And I think that's the last kind of piece of advice we'd leave you with, when it comes to the positioning, is if you don't have these things, if you have product market fit, but you haven't communicated it to the team, or you don't have this information, you're not getting it from your product organization, your marketing organization, and you're the revenue leader, you're the sales leader, then go get it. Because any investments in, you spend a couple days a week talking to customers using their language, it's going to pay dividends downstream for everything that you and your team do.
You take the time on the front end to shorten everything up on the back end. It makes everything easier and it shortens your sales cycle. So take the time on the front end.
Well, let's dive into the pace. Colin, give us a little overview of what that piece entails.
Cool. So pace is like how fast you want to move as a sales development team in terms of how big you want the team, how quickly you're going to, like how big the team's going to get, how many people it's going to be, how much you're going to invest in a sales development team, and like basically what you can spend to acquire a customer. And the reason we bring these pieces, this is that sales math equation. We've got if you're curious, if you're listening, we've got a spreadsheet. It's a bit messy and gross because I built it. I promise marketing is working on making it look less awful. But that's just the way my brain looks on the inside. It's a dumpster fire in there. But we got some interesting ideas out. The thing is, so many companies don't do the math ahead of time. They read predictable revenue. They're like, this sounds great. My board member gave it to me. My CEO gave it to me. We want to buy some sales development. And you can't just hire an SDR and say, here's a book, go. You have to do the math first. And I know, we're in sales. I'm in sales because I wasn't good at math in school. And so me standing up here and being like, do the math, you're probably like, Colin, like, I don't want to do the math. I don't know if I can do that on stream, but whatever.
It's been done.
It's been done.
Already done.
So thinking about, the first thing to think about is your finance strategy, right? Like how much cash do you have in the bank, and how quickly are you going to have more cash in the bank, right? If you're a bootstrap company, you're going to approach this very differently than if you got a VC or PE backer. So that's one thing to keep in consideration. The amount of cash in the bank is going to dictate the amount of pressure generally. If you're bootstrap, it's probably going to be slower. Obviously, you still want to grow fast, but you're not going to have as much cash to throw at it.
Right.
If you're PE or VC backed, changes the equation. So that's just kind of the first thing. If you're sitting on an SDR team, understand that on the right side of the curve is sort of VC backed. On the other side of the curve is bootstrap. So faster versus slower. And then you want to have a look at your sort of total market opportunity, right? How many companies and customers are out there? What's the shape of it? How much are each of those customers worth to you? And this is the equation that lets you figure out, okay, this is what I can spend to acquire a customer and it still be profitable. And this is why it ties back into, whether you're bootstrapped or VC backed. Because if you look at the Pacific Crest survey or David Scott's metrics, and we can link that up later, I think at the last one that I looked at, they were showing that your average VC backed company was spending $1.09 to acquire. They're spending $1.09 to acquire $1 of annual contract revenue, of annual revenue. So if your average deal size is $100,000, that means they're spending $109,000 to acquire that first year of revenue. That's what the average VC backed company is spending. So that means that like absolutely nobody's spending that because it's a composite average. Some are spending more, some are spending less. So if you're sitting here going, wow, that sounds crazy, I agree with you, but I come from a bootstrap company. We do things differently. We're not trying to be, a billion or a trillion or a decacorn or whatever in 6 months. So that's how the pace kind of comes in. And that's how you calibrate which of my channels and how fast, and, am I going to hire an SDR and have my current sales manager run them? Am I going to hire, the minimum viable sales team? And I'll end with this, and I'd love sort of people's comments here. In my opinion, the minimum viable sales development team, right? If you wave a magic wand, how much money do you spend to get that first team right? I'm going to say $500,000. And the reason why is you need a good sales development manager. Person's not cheap. You need 2 SDRs at least, plus a bunch of other support structures, data, tooling, somebody to make sure all the tooling works together. So it's not small. And depending on your market, you might be, elsewhere where this is a much smaller number, but the last time I did the math based on, I think, Austin, because it's not quite San Francisco, it's not New York, but it's still up there. It was around $509,000 or something like that. So I'm curious. So my default or my base SDR team, if I was going to wave a magic wand, $500K, 2 SDRs, 1 SDR manager team. What do you all think of that?
Yeah, it sounds about right. So it makes me want to ask you the question that I get asked constantly is, how do I decide whether I should outsource the SDR work, early on, or even after, 5 years in where, we kind of had some organic growth because we had really good product market fit. So kind of was flooding in at first, right? Mm-hmm. Now the investors gave us some more money and they want us to, grow even faster. So, where's that tipping point for me to say, let me outsource this SDR work versus let me build it internally, and I know there's some crossover and people, I sometimes recommend, well, somebody else has already got this down. Let them do it for you while you're building yours. But where do you see as that point where a CEO says, hey, don't spend the money, that $500,000 building it. We're not ready for that. Go outsource it. And I'll tell you when, we hit this point, then we're ready to build it.
Yeah. I mean, that's really more of a finance question than it is like a sales question. If we're talking about like how comfortable you are spending money. If you don't have $500,000, then, finding someone that can do that fractional sales management or sales development management, the fractional sales operations, that's helpful, I think. And I know this is funny to say as like the CEO of a company that does, that like sells or rents remote SDRs. But I think at the end of the day, in the long run, you're going to get a better ROI if you have this team internally. So the question is like, when is it strategically relevant or significant to be able to rent the team? And I think it's when you're learning and you're trying to do like maybe a pilot, you're trying to get more information, or where you don't have access to that sales development talent. So, if you can't hire a sales development manager, you don't know how to hire a sales development manager. If you don't know how to hire a sales development rep, finding people that have the experience that you can rent, whether it's renting the team or just renting the experience through like a coach or something like that, then I think it kind of makes sense. I want to look at the chat for a second, and then I'll come back to, I see some heads nodding. But Jonathan had a question. You need $500,000 for a rev team that lets people know what to buy, why to buy, encourages them, blah, blah, blah. Don't let titles get in the way. Agreed. You can't outsource your problems, only solutions. If you don't know how to go to market, then spending outsource is throwing money away, right? Absolutely.
Well, that's where a huge problem, right? So a lot of companies, including yourselves, successfully book appointments for other companies, right? But if you don't have good product market fit, and then you want to outsource your SDRs, that company that you're outsourcing to is not going to have success either. Not because they're not doing what they should be doing, but because the product market fit is not there.
I have to jump in here because the opportunity before a company to figure out whether or not they want to outsource or do it themselves, again, goes back to that positioning conversation we just had, the fundamentals. And then when you add the pace to it, the fact that if you don't or haven't taken the approach to conduct the market research, to understand those market reports and those leading indicators and those trends, and you really don't know those customers and what they're consuming and where and how, and doing that persona research and all of those key things to figure out not only your ideal customer profile, but also the customer acquisition cost, then all of this falls on a potential travesty in the making because you just don't have, again, that fit. And so typically outbound sales teams are a lot more profitable in general when they have an annual contract value of around 15 to say 20,000 US dollars. When you have something smaller than that, a lot of that can be done through inbound. But you have to answer the questions of that proof, that social proof that lends you to be able to, again, continue to make that product market fit, to continue to make that buyer message fit, if you will, because otherwise it's a snowball running down the hill, and the problems become larger and larger. And you know, agreed to, I didn't catch the name of the person in the chat, but yeah, it's a waste of money.
Yeah, I can tell you a quick story of a software company that I was working with that had an SDR who they thought was just crushing it, right? He booked so many appointments. It was crazy. His job was just book demos, book demos, book demos. So this one guy, he just booked, there was a couple of them, but this one just, booked so many demos. The others weren't able to do it. So the salespeople were busy getting on and doing those demos. None of them converted. None of them converted. So here we have, money spent on 2-3 SDRs, one of them crushing it. The AE is getting on, and that's what we asked SDRs to do, right? Book appointments, and they did it. And he was compensated well for it. So he kept booking them, but they weren't converting. So then I said, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, he was able to talk somebody into looking at this, but the product market fit wasn't there. So here we go back to, right? So the pace was hurry up and book more appointments and grow faster, right? So we're going to stand up an SDR team, and they did stand up a small SDR team, but then they had one guy who was just crazy enough to be able to book appointments, but they weren't converting because the product market fit wasn't there. So then they thought, okay, this isn't working. We're not going to have any more SDRs because the SDRs are booking appointments that don't convert. Okay. So what do? They stopped their SDR team and outsourced it. We're going to outsource it, and we're going to get them to book the demos, book the appointments for the AEs. So they didn't have any luck. Now, those outsourced teams were much, much better, and they were expert at it. And they came back and said, it's product market fit. We're calling the wrong people, and therefore they're not interested. And yes, we could, like that one guy, talk them into doing a demo, but so what? Because you already had that happen and didn't convert. So they canceled that company and said, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, and tried another company because the investors were like, we need you to scale faster. So we need you to get more appointments booked. Same thing happened. So 3 in a row, their own SDRs, 2 external, teams trying to book for them. So this is why, back to, okay, so we're talking about pace right now, but you can't go fast if you didn't do the first part. If you didn't get the product market fit right, it doesn't matter whether you outsource it or do it internally, both cost money, right? It still isn't going to work. So I think that back to what a CEO should do, right? Because the CEO has to now report back to these investors 3 failures in booking appointments that convert into actual business. So how do we do this right? So I think that any company out there that is offering their services to book appointments, and I know you guys do this, owe it to the people who call you to do that, to figure out first, do we have product market fit? And then second, the math has to work, right? Yes. At this point in your juncture of where you are with your investors and your finances and all that, it's better to outsource. while you stand up your own SDR team. So let's do both at, kind of almost simultaneously, but let's get some appointments booked. And then we can start standing up the SDR team. And that's kind of the way that I like to do it best, because we waste time if we just wait till our own SDR team is ready to go. That's why I like your model, because you can do it for them, as well as train them, coach them, help them stand up their own SDR team at the same time. But I just think it's an important thing for CEOs to understand the math, like Colin was saying, and how to do that math so you know when to choose to outsource it or to build it internally.
Mm-hmm. And last thing I'll say on this is, I can't remember where this quote came from, but I heard it early days, and it is an entrepreneurial book. And their advice was, don't outsource your core. So if something is core to the success of your business, don't outsource that. And I think initially it's fine. It's great to do it with sales development, because it doesn't make sense for every company to just jump in and spend $500K right up front and make that huge investment. And so I can see sort of stepping into it, but in the long run, you want to own your revenue streams, and having that outsourced permanently is easier, but I think it would make me uncomfortable as the CEO. And so if it's core to your business, if it's core to your operations, I don't want to be relying on somebody external. I'd rather build it internally. And just the last, Francisco, thanks for the comment. I just threw the rough numbers in there. Very, very rough. I did the calcs based on Austin a year ago or so. So I think we'll have a sheet coming out that kind of documents a little bit more, but there's, extra room in there for overhead and all of that. So those are the numbers. Sarah, I know we got 14 minutes left and we got one more piece to go. So I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, sounds good. So we've touched on those two foundational elements. Although we are speaking as if these are three things in order, each of them are, as Colin says, and I can never remember the phrase, but it's something about a chain link. What is it?
It's a chain link strategy.
Okay. It's a chain link strategy. So basically each of these three things, although we're talking about them 1, 2, 3, they're kind of equal. They're actually sitting next to each other, or in any order, or on top of each other. Either way, if any of these things is missing or broken, it's all broken. So please don't think that we've like prioritized the one and we're moving our way down to this last one. But the last one is practice. So Colin, what is practice?
Yeah. And I said strategy, but I meant to say system. It's a chain link system where the strength of the whole is limited by the weakest link. So if you think about it that way, they all three work together. So when we talk about practice, this includes the playbook. So if you think about it, it's almost like a 7 coming across. We're looking at the top 3 things, and then we drill real deep into the playbook. Lives in here, and we're not going to go into it. We'll go into it in a different day, because we only got 12 minutes left and I can talk forever. So I'll try and shut up really quickly. Practice is really about where, the first 2 are kind of the elements of the strategy. Practice is converting that strategy into the tactics and into results. So this is where the rubber meets the road. It's things like getting support and buy-in from the entire revenue organization, from product, marketing, sales, your closers, all the way through sales development and customer success. It's that creating a culture of experimentation where this isn't just, okay, we're going to take this book that somebody wrote once and now it's good and we're going to apply it carte blanche. It's we're going to practice and test and we're going to try different things. It involves hiring the right team to build and lead. As I mentioned, you can't just hire one SDR. So there's all these little things that just kind of lead to like, are we executing well? Are we doing a great job of executing?
Mm-hmm. And on that, there's so many different elements that fit into that, and practice, makes perfect. You have to plan, make a practice plan. My husband coaches hockey, and he's always making a practice plan. And I think you have to also approach it in that sense where, yes, you not only get support from the entire organization when you sort of start into this, but this endeavor is cyclical and it continues, and it should be iterated and repeated on. And you should probably check in on it at least once a quarter, minimum once a half, right? Have we gone back and looked at our ICP? Has it changed? What about the pace? Do we need to, do we press on the gas a little bit more? Do we need to potentially ease up, right? But there's certainly elements in terms of testing and being able to create that outbound program from scratch to then get a consistent producing pipeline takes a long time. It takes 4 to 6 months, even if everything goes really, really smoothly. But then at scale, to really get it moving, it's probably another 8 to 18 to see really the beginnings of what we call predictable revenue. So a lot of the failures that we see and customers that come to us, or the expectations are, okay, I'm going to outsource to you guys, and in 3 months I'm going to have this amazing pipeline. It doesn't happen that fast. So the expectations too, back to the mindset and that positioning, have to be accommodated as well, not only internally and across, of course, your entire organization, right? But also to the customers, obviously, that you're servicing too.
Yeah, there's a lot to this practice piece, and I think it can't be taken too lightly, but does have to be a loop, because you're going to come back to your product market fit, right? Is that still the case? I mean, look, we just had one of the craziest economies of all time due to a pandemic. Product market fit probably changed. I mean, I had companies selling into the hospitality industry. So they had to, I mean, this was horrible, right? So yeah, that is no longer an option. We've got to find some other verticals that can buy from us, because things pretty much stopped. So you have to loop, you have to go back. Do we have the right product market fit? Do we have the right message for the right people? Is it still working? What else can we do? And I think just asking yourself those questions, every quarter, however often you're going to review it, just making sure and shoring it up. It just that practice piece has to be a loop. And then you have to go back to the pace and the product market fit, the positioning.
One of the interesting.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Go ahead. Okay.
I was just going to say, you go. Over to you.
Okay. I'll be quick. One of the important things about the feedback loops is kind of identifying the mechanisms that are in place for that feedback to exit those loops. That's like a really tough thing, is often the feedback, like, where does it go though? Because anywhere throughout that journey, somebody can identify something that's wrong. And it's similar to the Japanese manufacturing philosophy of Kaizen, which is like anybody anywhere along the manufacturing anything can like pull the cord and say something's broken, and that needs to be listened to and adhered to regardless of seniority or anything like that. So there's that. It's like the idea that anybody throughout the feedback loop can pull the cord so that we can fix it. But also the feedback loops are everywhere. There's like mini feedback loops happening, SDR to prospect to SDR. And that's like your front line. But then there's also the customer success to customer. And that should feed all the way back to the way the SDRs go target. So it's like each individual that's involved in this entire revenue generating organization needs to be a stakeholder in the sales development. Even if it's just the outbound piece that we're speaking to separately, it's not a distinct entity from the rest of the entire revenue generating organization in the company.
Love that.
That's right.
Yeah, very good. The feedback from things like, the cold emails, the calls, the social touches, the CSAT scores. Again, it's like crowdsourcing, really. You're crowdsourcing, but you're crowdsourcing internally, right? Throughout your company, throughout everybody that touches ultimately the customer. And you listen to the voice of the customer. And in some cases, that can inform you into potentially a pivot into a new ideal customer profile that you may not have even discovered, or a new line of product or service offering that you might not have even thought about. And so that crowdsourcing as well as that closed loop feedback is super critical, and certainly can help with respect to iterating on this practice and just getting better and better with the practice of that.
I think if everybody just keeps in mind, sales leaders, CEOs, even the salespeople, everybody out there, that sales is not about the sellers. Sales is about the way your customers buy. And that is why marketing, sales, customer success, operations, everybody, like you were saying, Sarah, has to be on board with the message, with, the product market fit, the positioning, with the message, with what we're trying to accomplish, with customer experience, because that way they know when there's a problem. and it's not working, and they can feed it back. When they don't know and understand, and they think that sales is only about the sellers, it's the seller's responsibility, nobody else is involved in that, it doesn't work. We're all involved in it. We all have the opportunity to see and feedback. And when we look at that and change our mindset that sales is about sellers to sales is about the way the customer buys, then we can do a much better job throughout this entire process.
I think that's part of the reason too that we recommend, again, if you are going to hire, you hire 2 SDRs, because any one singular of anything, you're not going to get the majority, insights. You're not going to get the adequate representation across multiple, let alone be able to test and see if the experiments or the messaging or anything that you're doing is going to be relevant. So hire for 2, and at least there's one with at least half their time dedicated entirely to the program.
Totally.
Nice.
And it's a system, it's a team sport, right? This is why we've talked about product today. We've talked about marketing today. We've talked about sales, and we've talked about sales development. You can't have a sales. And I think this is the core message that we were trying to get across with separating the principles from the process. You can't have a sales development team that operates in a vacuum. Right. Sales development is an extension of the sales and marketing and product team. It's an extension of the company. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's a part of all of these teams, and its success is going to be, largely a function of the rest of the composite pieces of the company. Right. And so if you've got a sales development team that's absolutely crushing it, yeah, they're doing a great job, and like props to them. They also need to recognize that they exist as part of the system. And so credit goes to the product team and the marketing team and the sales team. And same to be said when things aren't working, right? It's all a function of the same system. And so whether it's going well or whether it's not going well, our goal here was to help you see that these things all work together. And the core of it is really the customer. If you have something that customers need, it'll be much easier to do everything else. The needs of the market and the customer have changed and will change. And as a CEO, the hardest thing for me is to stay in touch with, as I build more layers in between me and the people on the front lines. One of the hardest things is to stay in touch with reality, with what's actually happening. Once a year, and I'm just coming through our last round, I talk to all of our customers. I get them on the phone, and there are no questions. It's just, hey, what's going on? How's it going? What do you like? What don't you like? Because I find it, as somebody who started my life in sales, who had a quota, first off, it was weird not having the bag where I was carrying, I kept looking back and I feel like I should be making dials. I feel like I should be closing deals. That was hard. And then getting used to not having this really rich, customer information is crazy. And so to the teams that aren't leveraging this information as a way of improving their strategy, of feeding back into the rest of the organization, it's just a huge opportunity for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a perfect place for us to wrap up. We've just got a couple of minutes left here. So just want to say to you guys that if any of this kind of rung true as something that is a stumbling block for you in your company right now, if you're feeling like you could have better clarity in any of these areas, we would love to have a conversation with you about that. Have a quick call just to assess. Again, not a sales call. We're not carrying the bag either, just like Colin was saying. So yeah, we'd love to talk to you about that and see what's going on there. So we'll drop a link in the YouTube chat. If you're listening to this later, you can go back and look through the chat. But if you don't want to do that, it is bit.ly/PR discovery. But yeah, we'll drop it in the chat so you can also grab it there. Thank you so much to Alice, Colin, and Carrie for joining us on the first half of the new sales development methodology workshop series. Again, we're going to have another one that does dive really into those tactics, which is the playbook, the second half of the methodology. So that's coming up soon. Stay tuned. And then, of course, if you ever have any questions, feel free to shoot us an email, shoot us a LinkedIn message. I know Colin and I are both very receptive, and Carrie too, and I'm sure Alice too, are very receptive to LinkedIn messages and all that stuff. So please reach out.
Love to hear from you.
Thanks, team.
Really good. Thank you.
We'll catch you
Bye.
guys